Yeah, surprisingly, we're actually getting some views on YouTube. Not a lot, 5 or so, but some people outside this room are watching this. So we'll make the effort to continue it along. Okay, so third and final installment of Greece. And just so you guys have an idea, I think I've mentioned this before, that a lot of the Greece stuff I pulled out of some old New Church Life articles. And it's 42 pages of stuff that this Carl Theophilus Oedner wrote about. And some of it I find isn't entirely accurate, as far as when he's recounting, this is the myth of so-and-so and these things happen. So it's kind of weird to fact check these things so that I understand what he's talking about and find out, that's actually not right, at least is what some people have. So that's been the adventure with this, is going through it and figuring out what is right and wrong. But hey, if you're researching in 1905, what are your resources and how do you collaborate all this? And I think I said earlier that the Greece stuff, it does.
Nobody was probably game enough to challenge.
Yeah,
that's another thing too, right?
Well, and it does seem like there's a fair bit of inconsistency even amongst the Greeks as to how these stories go. So it seems like Oedner was trying to take, this is what this guy's chain of stories is, and goes off of that. So maybe what I'm finding is different from that. I don't know, but it's kind of strange. It's one of the things that makes me think about the scriptures and just how consistent they are over thousands of years, and how impressive that is. And we talk about children of Israel being the chosen people. It wasn't chosen because they were good, but maybe it was chosen because they were really good at copying things. They were really good at it. Yeah, they were really good at that part of it. So I don't know, but I know that's not what the writings say, but it sure seems like that had to have been a consideration. So anyway, so this is the last third of the Greece stuff, and we just have a few different gods we're going to take a look at. But these are for the most part people you've at least heard of, I would imagine. So we'll start with Hades. It's worth mentioning here that I wrote spirit world because he's known as the god of the underworld, but that does not mean hell in the Greek context. So one of the things I learned was that it's like the spiritual world. The underworld is, the idea was that the spiritual world is beneath us. It's inside the earth. And he's Lord over all of that, not just the hell. But it seems that over time, as the mythology went through passing down over years and years, he slowly became more associated with hell. But it certainly didn't seem to start out that way. So this little description is off of Wikipedia because I feel like it was pretty concise. But on his head, he wears a peculiar crown on which is represented the crescent moon, and under this, an inverted crescent with its horns pointing downward. In one hand, he holds a key, and in the other, a two-pronged scepter. Let me move me and Ralph out of the way so you can see that. At his side is the helmet of invisibility, which on one occasion he lent to Minerva, who again bestowed it upon Perseus when this hero went forth to slay the Gorgon. At his feet sits the three-headed dog Cerberus. Any of you who are Harry Potter fans will know that the dog exists over there. And I also thought the invisibility thing, Harry Potter has his cloak of invisibility. This guy has the helmet of invisibility. And that really is a weird looking little helmet there. So not sure what. It sure does. Yeah. Yeah, right.
Interesting to see from different angles.
Could be something from the back of the chair.
Good.
Let's see if I can make this.
Well, it said crescent moon and another crescent moon with the horns pointing down. We can't really see that.
I accidentally moved forward. There's a way to make these people go above. And apparently I'm not doing it right. Right now, video. Let's try that. Oh, wait, we don't need to see Ralph. Yeah, we've seen enough, Ralph.
I'll leave the room.
We won't know.
You've already left the room. We haven't seen you right.
So yeah, so there's the basics on it. So let's take a look at some of this is about. So Hades, he says, must represent the most ultimate degree of divine truth, the natural, sensual degree, or the merely literal sense of the word, the letter which killeth, the dead letter. As such, we find Hades as the god of the interiors of the earth, in which, as in the letter of the word, there are inexhaustible mines of wealth, invisible on the surface, but obtainable those who dig, that is, investigate. So, yeah, it's a common thing throughout the Greek myth that, yeah, association of wealth with digging, you know, the wealth is inside the earth. And so Hades also becomes a god of wealth because, well, that's where the gold is, that's where the diamonds, that's where all the jewels are, it's inside, so, and it's hidden. So Odin's making the case that Hades is an equivalent to the literal sense of the word because, well, the interior sense is hidden. The real jewel of the internal sense is hidden. The key, now, the key is that, you know, the key that he's holding in his right hand there, you can't really see it very well, signifies the word closed as its inner meanings, the two-pronged scepter, each prong of which is a little flame, seems to signify the power of the word in the letter, with its twofold correspondences ranging from opposite to opposite, each word having both a good and evil significance. Compare in this connection the angel with the flaming sword, Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve are kicked out, guarding the way to the tree of life, by which is signified the word in the letter, which can be turned and twisted so as to either confirm either truth or falsity. So, I mean, I don't know.
Is this something that he's just dreamed up, or is there, you know, other references that confirm his?
I think this is stuff he's, I won't say dreamed of, but but this is his best idea of what he sees it to be. You know, I have a few quotes from the writings in this section about Cerberus in particular, because Swedenborg does mention him a couple times. Yeah. But the rest of it, yes, is a bit of conjecture. And I mean, this is kind of what you have to look at is like, you know, if you see that Hades is if you buy that basic premise that he's the literal sense, a symbol of the literal sense of the word, then the other stuff starts to hold up all right. But you've got to buy that starting principle that he's that literal sense. And, you know, do the Greeks have that kind of knowledge? You know, I don't know, but it just, you know, to me, with all the stuff that happens with all these gods, and you see the little details that are in there, you know, they're there for a reason, right? You know, I feel like at least in modern times, we make this crazy sci-fi thing just because we want to be crazy and scare somebody, show something they haven't seen before. But I don't get the Greeks that the Greeks were into that. So to me, it's interesting that he has the two-pointed staff there. I mean, who does that? You know, what's the deal? You know, you never see that in real life. A trident, you know, okay.
Yeah, you see that in real life.
More likely than this thing. So either that or it's.
There doesn't seem to be much purpose to that, as a spear or something like that.
Unless it's to hold the dog's head, you know.
Right.
Backstory.
Yeah, dogs have 3 heads,
yeah. Yeah. So, Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot of this is conjecture on Odin's part, but uh, he's yeah, theories, but it's as reasonable as stuff as I can find. Um, the double crescent signifies faith derived from the letter of the word, which may turn upward to heaven or downward to hell. The helmet of invisibility also points to the literal sense at which times makes the spiritual sense invisible, that is, incomprehensible. That's true. Cerberus, in the best aspect, signifies the same letter which acts as a guardian over the internal sense, preventing profaners from entering in. Now, the Cerberus stuff here, that's going to be backed up by the writings, pretty solid, as you'll see in a minute. So that works.
What's your hits?
Yeah, I mean, three's always about being complete, right? So, and it's, if you see him as this guardian, I would take it as he's a guardian on a natural, spiritual, and celestial level. And you'd have something like that. But that helmet of invisibility is, to me, is fascinating because if you're looking at this idea that Hades is this figure about the literal sense of the word, well, yeah, there is an invisibility to the interior stuff, and there is an invisibility to the underworld. There are some interesting aspects, and if you buy into the idea that the underworld and the mind and the wealth that's there, well, yeah, the spiritual sense, that's where the real value is. Jesus compares it to the pearl of great price. So, yeah, I find it interesting to ponder. Some of the stuff is there. But this double crescent he talks about here in that first, I searched all over to find some way to back that up, but I can't find pictures of it. I'm guessing from the way he describes it, it's like up here on the guy's head that it's. But Odin mentions that, and he mentions the key, and even the key, it's impossible to find an image where Hades has the keys. You get a reference to it in the. Yeah, well, that's true in this one, but even on this one, it's like, you look closely, it's like, well, is the key supposed to be here? But I think that may very well be the leash for Cerberus. And when I search around the keys in Hades, you get the reference to a revelation. Yeah, maybe it's in his pocket, but I don't know. So, the other thing that's hard to do with this kind of stuff is sort out between what's a modern depiction of him and versus the original authentic ones. Because if the key is supposed to be in this right arm that's chopped off, well, that's a problem.
Someone else has
Somebody stole it.
Yeah. So here is the one of the two passages I'll show you on Cerberus. He says, I saw a large dog like the one very ancient authors called Cerberus. It had horrible gaping jaws. I was told that a dog such as this means the guard which is set to prevent a person crossing over from heavenly conjugal love to a love of adultery, which is a hellish love. For heavenly conjugal love consists in one living content in the Lord together with one's partner whom one loves very tenderly and with one's children. In the world, this brings a person a deeper pleasure, and in the next life, heavenly joy. But if people cross over from that love to its opposite, and this opposite love seems to them to hold heavenly delight within it, though in fact it is a hellish delight, a dog resembling Cerberus presents itself as if to guard, as if on guard to prevent any communication of opposite delights. So, when you read that and you go back to this, Cerberus in the best aspect signifies this guardian over the internal sense. You go, well, okay, preventing profaners from entering in. That's the same kind of idea as we get here. So I feel like Odin's on solid ground with that idea. What I look at as well is that last paragraph, just kind of a theological side note here is just notice all the qualifiers, I guess. All right. So if you have this love and this opposite love seems to hold the delight, then the dog presents itself. So, one of the things that about evil that I've been realizing, I guess, over the years is that there's a big difference between doing something evil and doing something evil and thinking it's okay. And saying, yep, this is fine. When you've lost that conscience about it, and yet when you get to that place, there's also the kind of qualification of doing evil out of ignorance. And so, Swedenborg says, the road to heaven is not as difficult as many would believe. And to me, it's because of all these kind of qualifiers that are in place to mitigate the evil that has been done. It's like, to me, I read this and it's like, well, okay, if somebody is in conjugal love and then falls into adultery, but they don't see the heavenly delight in it. It's like they know that there's something wrong with it. They've had a one-night stand or whatever. It just seems like that's not what Cerberus is guarding against. He's guarding against that person saying, oh, this is the real heaven. This is where it's really at. And making these two delights communicate. Which isn't to say that that's a good thing to do, but I guess the more I read it, I just feel like, there's a lot of ways in which the Lord mitigates the evil that we do in our life, and this is an example of that. Next one. The angel who had previously been my guide and companion to the ancient peoples who had lived in the 4 ages, the gold and silver, copper and iron, came to me once more and said, you would like to see the nature of the age which followed these ancient ages and which still continues. Follow me then, and you shall see. They are those of whom Daniel prophesied. A kingdom shall arise after those 4, wherein iron shall be mixed with miry clay. They shall mingle themselves for the seed of man, but they shall not cleave the one with the other, even as iron is not commingled with clay. And he added, by the seed of man, through which iron shall be mingled with clay, and yet shall not cleave together, is meant the truth of the word falsified. After he had thus spoken, I followed him, and on the way he told me the following. They dwell on the border between the south and the west, but at a great distance behind those who lived in the 4 former ages, and also at a greater depth. Proceeding through the south to a region bordering upon the west, we passed through a dreadful forest, for in it were stagnant pools from which crocodiles raised their heads and gaped at us with their wide open jaws beset with teeth. Moreover, between the pools were terrible dogs, some with 3 heads like Cerberus, some with 2. And as we passed, they all glared at us with horrible, ravenous look and fierce eyes. We entered the western part of this region and saw dragons and leopards, such as are described in the Apocalypse 12 and 13. So,
there are dragons in the walls.
Yeah. Well, see, this is so cool. There are lots of things.
It's where you're going.
Yeah. Maybe where you're going, yeah. No, but to me, let's see, make sure. Did I clip it? No, there we go, here we go. All right. And then the angel told me, all those wild beasts which you saw are not beasts, but correspondences. Thus, they are representative forms of the lusts in which are the inhabitants whom we are to visit. Their lusts are represented by those horrible dogs, their deceits and cunning by the crocodiles, their falsities and their depraved inclinations in respect to things pertaining to worship by the dragons and leopards. The inhabitants who are thus represented do not dwell immediately behind the forest, but behind a great desert. The desert itself being an intermediate region, and this to the end that they may be kept entirely separate and apart from the peoples of the preceding ages. So,
That doesn't give Cerberus a very good map.
no, the Cerberus in a bad sense is not a very good thing. Yeah, well, you know, honestly, this is one of the things I've even thought about with having a dog, because like often in the writings, dogs seriously have a very bad correspondence. There very few places. Well, I can honestly say I can't remember ever finding a place where dogs have a good correspondence, but it seems that they must have. Everything has its good and its bad. And I think of the, you know, dog as man's best friend, but here you have, you know, their lusts are represented by these horrible dogs.
Well, those dogs are horrible.
Yeah. But
Local pit bulls.
yeah.
Right.
But what really gets me is that all those wild beasts which you saw are not beasts, but correspondences. And that's the one that hits me hard and just goes, wow, okay. Because there are plenty of people who have a near-death experience, and they've seen animals in the next life. And, you know, this one friend of mine, you know, he swears that he sees the ghost of his dog who has passed away.
Ooh.
And it's like, well, what do you make of that? You know, because the writings tell us that animals don't have souls. But we can get images like this where, yeah, you can see animals in the next life, but if it's, you know, the dog you had seems to appear to you, I don't know how you make sense of that one.
My limited understanding is that, yeah, it's about correspondences and that particular affection.
Yeah,
I don't get it, but yes.
that's the best I can do with it. That makes sense to me. But
Maybe the feelings that are engendered by that dog are what then are represented by it. Feelings that you have on this earth.
Mm.
You have them over there. It's, yeah. Maybe.
I don't remember. Do dogs represent appetites? Well, let's just look up a new search right now. We've got it available to us. Dog. Dogs are not. Yeah, here's this. Dogs, those outside the church who are in unclean falsities. Lowest of the church, is outside the church. Yeah, let's see appetites. Let's take a look at this one. Dog shall not move his tongue. The dog signifies the lowest of all. Those who are of small value in the church. So it's not actually a bad thing to be that. So dog does have that good representation. To be lowest of all is still good, or those who are of small value in the church. Okay. Dogs. Dogs mean those who render the good of faith unclean by means of falsifications. Is that dogs eat unclean things and also yap and bite people. Ha! I did not make that up. All right. So there you go. Quickie on dogs. Anyway, I just, in general, I find it interesting that, you know, Swedenborg writes about Cerberus and has these connections in with these Greek myths. Yeah, that's interesting. So moving on from Hades and Cerberus and the underworld, we get to what I like to call Persephone.
I was going to say.
It just drives my wife nuts. I do things as they are spelled.
Isn't it Persephone? Is it all that? No,
Persephone.
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 This goddess appears in a twofold aspect, which again is interesting. You know, corresponds to the word have good and bad, right? She's a twofold aspect as a beneficent deity, virginal and smiling, and as the queen of death and hell, stern, pale-faced, and sable-robed. Her name has been variously interpreted. Some say it signifies one who showers food. According to other authorities, it means light destroyer or death bearer. Yeah. Kind of Jekyll and Hyde there, huh? Yeah. And this is an interesting little story. So I didn't know this. The abduction of Persephone. And, you know, tuck this away in your mind, in the back of your mind too, when you think of it, because a lot of people describe this as the rape of Persephone. But more I dig into it, I don't see any rape so much as abduction. And some people do call it the abduction of Persephone. So I don't know if somebody's just trying to be dramatic with the rape claim, but anyway, it is out there. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter and Zeus. Persephone was picking flowers one day when Hades saw her. He was so captivated by her beauty that he took her by force to the underworld. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and fertility, searched for her daughter when Persephone went missing. Once she realized Persephone was taken to the underworld, she protested the abduction by stopping her work with crops. Before this time, food in Greece was always plentiful, but now crops failed and food was scarce. Zeus and the other gods tried to convince Demeter to lift her curse on the land, but she would not until her daughter was released. Zeus then sent Hermes to Hades, urging him to release Persephone. Hades understood this as a demand that he needed to follow. Before releasing her, Hades had her eat seeds of the pomegranate. Because she ate fruit from the underworld, she was now tied to the underworld and to Hades. Zeus was forced to make a compromise between Demeter and Hades in their claims to Persephone. He arranged a plan for Persephone to spend 4 months with Hades as his queen, one for every seed of the pomegranate she had eaten. The other 8 months she would return to her mother. Demeter continued to allow the crops to fail when Persephone was with Hades. This myth of Persephone was used by the Greeks to explain the cycle of fertility in nature. Persephone this is from Odiner, Persephone as a maiden and the harbinger of spring fitly represents the youthful natural affection of truth, while Demeter, the goddess of harvest, represents good works, or natural good in the church universal. In this light, the story of here he calls it the rape of Persephone, becomes the story of the ancient church, and of every church in its decline when the affection of truth is separated from the good works by means of Hades, the merely literal understanding of the word, a process which we may see illustrated in the Roman Catholic Church, where external good works remain though deprived of the affection of truth, the love of spiritual things. In this church, the clergy have usurped for themselves the wine of the sacrament and also the reading of the interpretation of the word, just as Hades violently carried away Persephone, while to the people is left the bread alone, and the external good works as the sole means of salvation. So, when you consider, Odiner's speculations and, did he dream all this up? I look at this middle paragraph here. Look at this middle paragraph here, and I think, he holds it together pretty well. The Persephone becomes a story of the ancient church. The affection of truth is separated from the good works by means of Hades, the understanding of the word, a literal understanding of the word. And you go, okay, this starts to hold together reasonably well. He's done a good job of trying to make all these pieces fit and not just, this staff must mean that, and this must mean that, and then the whole thing doesn't hold together. So, yeah. The ever-occurring reappearance of Persephone represents, on the other hand, the fact that the affection of truth, or the love of spiritual things, is bound to reassert itself in the church after every state of spiritual winter. as it did in the Christian church at the time of the Renaissance and the Reformation, as it does periodically in the life of every regenerating person. For during all the days of the earth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease, from Genesis. So you probably know that line from Genesis. This is the end of the Noah's Ark story. And the Lord promises, yep, there's going to be cycles. And if you go into what the writings talk about with that passage, yeah, it says, life's going to have these cycles to it. When you're feeling good, you're going to have moments where you're feeling bad. There's going to be temptation. There's going to be victory. There's going to be new things and old things and things dying off and things coming in and new. And so, it's true in the world around us, and it's true in our spiritual lives as well. And so Persephone picks up that symbolism and personifies it, is what it comes down to. Yeah. Comments, okay.
Just with regard to whether it's the abduction or the rape,
Yep.
the phrasing of "he took her by force," I feel like there are places in the word that imply sex, but they don't say sex, and that I wonder if taking by force, that's the part that.
Yeah. Point well taken, but yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm just trying to look it back where it says that. Took the underworld. I mean, this is all paraphrasing, so I don't know that it counts as gospel what I have written here. Yeah. No, it's an interesting point. I mean, right, what I have written and what I found, there is no statement of raping, no sexual, but yeah, I understand what you're saying that.
And you've also said that the Greek myths have changed and evolved over time, and I wonder if originally it was more graphic or whatever.
Why would they let her go back for 4 months of the year?
Yeah. Well, when I search up the story, like I said, there's definitely the two strands where people call it the rape and some people call it the abduction. But even in the ones where they call it the rape, there is no mention of it, which is what was kind of puzzling, which caused me to research further what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, you bring up an interesting point that maybe it's in the day, the language, like when Swedenborg writes of sodomy, he doesn't call it homosexuality, but the language at the time, and sodomy is homosexuality in the 18th century. So could be something like that. All right, we did that one. So moving forward move to Charon, and the river Styx. Having arrived at the confines of Hades' kingdom, all spirits found themselves first on the banks of the river Styx, a black and bridgeless stream, too swift for even the boldest swimmer. The only means of crossing was by the ferry of Charon, a grim old boatman who would accept no passenger without being paid the sum of a penny, the obos. The ancients on this account were careful to place a small piece of money under the tongue of the deceased. All those who could not produce this sum were obliged to wait for 100 anxious years, at the end of which they would be ferried over free of charge. So he takes sympathy on you eventually. You have nowhere else to go.
It's funny when they dig up in Rome and Britain, the skulls of some of the Romans. They had a coin in their mouth.
Yeah, well,
you had to pay the ferryman.
Mm-hmm. Apparently, he didn't take the money if it's still there. And this is what Odner writes about the symbolism of this. We conceive this whole myth as referring to the state of vastation in the world of spirits, And we're reminded in this connection of the words of the Lord in Matthew. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. That is, no evil spirit is let down into hell unless he is vastated of the last vestige of good and truth. And no good spirit is elevated into heaven until he's delivered from the last remnant of evil and falsity. Old Charon would seem to represent the inexorable justice which demands this vastation before the final judgment. So this...
Why would you leave a penny under the tongue if that was to get into hell?
Yeah, yeah, right. I don't want to go, thanks. Well, but that's the thing, you know, it's the underworld, it's the spiritual world. To be let into the spiritual world is not hell specifically. So just, you know, again, as a little side note here, this quote from Matthew, you look that up, and what the greater context is Jesus telling people to make right with those who have a quarrel with you. And in this case, like, well, you know, if, you know, you think your brother owes you money, you know, get it right. Don't let the courts and the judges and get involved. Just deal with it yourselves. You know, you don't want to get into debt over a judgment and get into prison, because you won't get out of prison until you have paid the last penny. So, you know, I don't know about Odner's use of that quote in this sense, because these souls aren't really in prison when they die, right? You don't die and are imprisoned until you reach the world of spirits. So he's taking it a step farther and saying, okay, well, you were imprisoned in the world of spirits, so you're vastated, but then it's like what Murray's saying is, well, why would you want to pay your way into hell in the Christian sense? So
I'm surprised the word has the word, capital W, has the word penny in it.
oh wow, that's the NIV translation.
Yeah.
I think the New King James calls it farthing. I think is what they had it was.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's
Britified.
Yeah. That's translation. Let me move on to Hermes, our final character we look at here. The son of Zeus by Maia, immediately after his birth, he invented the first lyre by stretching strings across a tortoise shell and then set out to steal a herd of oxen from Apollo. The sun god soon discovered the theft, but was appeased by the gift of the lyre, with which he was so pleased that he presented to Hermes a magic winged wand called the caduceus, and moreover recommended for him for the special service of the gods. In Olympus, his nimble wit and wonderful agility and energy were quickly recognized, and he was therefore appointed the messenger and herald of Zeus in particular, and in plenipotentiary ambassador of the gods in general. Henceforth, he was constantly traveling, descending from heaven with messages and blessings from the gods, and returning from the earth laden with the prayers of men, the chief means of communication and conjunction between heaven and
Yeah,
earth.
that's a strange word. Was it plenipotentiary?
Have you been practicing that one?
You would think so. I should have, but I believe it's the top dog kind of thing. He's the best. He's the top ambassador of the gods. You get paid $5 every time you use one of those words, so you might as well. The story of Hermes as an infant stealing the oxen of Apollo is also capable of being explained in a relatively good sense, even as the story of the thefts of Jacob and Rachel, concerning which we read at their stealing of the teraphim. That's Laban's household idols. This signifies to claim for oneself that which is the Lord's, namely good and truth. And as all do this in the beginning of regeneration, the expression is milder than it sounds in the letter. Elsewhere in Acrana, forward generation man supposes that he procures truth for himself, and so long as he supposes this, he is in spiritual theft. The theft of Hermes, like the drunkenness of Noah, may therefore refer to the first state of the ancient church, which in the beginning was more or less in faith alone, and they would steal the oxen of Apollo, that is, ascribe to itself the good, which is the Lord's alone. So, back to Murray's, was Odiner dreaming this up? You can definitely see on some of these slides, he's a bit more, a bit less firm on it, He says, may therefore refer to, and it seems like this. Some of them he's doing a bit more of that versus others he's like, and this is this, and this is this. So I think even he realizes he's not on a solid ground with this one, this particular section here. But this other stuff is more interesting. He says, Hermes was forgiven because he invented the first instrument of music. The infant church was condoned because it was nevertheless in the spiritual affection of truth, though this affection was at first of a very external quality, as indicated by the shell of a tortoise. Now, just, think about it. Stringed instruments are the ones that represent spiritual, the problem with the vocabulary is when we say spiritual church in a sense of the new church, it's about love of the neighbor, and it's not spiritual as in a broader sense. He's talking about love of the neighbor kind of sense here. So that's what the ancient church was about, love of the neighbor as opposed to love of the Lord. So as Vulcan has been compared to Tubal-Cain, so Hermes may be compared to Jubal, who was the father of such as play upon the harp and the organ, by whom was signified the spiritual affection or the affection of truth in the ancient church. So for those of you who haven't memorized the genealogies in Genesis, Tubal-Cain and Jubal were of a same generation. Basically, I think it's Cain's 6 generations after Cain. So it's Lamech has 2 different wives, and these guys are barely mentioned at all, but Tubal-Cain was the blacksmith, and Jubal was the one who makes the instruments. That's about all we know about them. But the wings of Hermes are the wings and the staff are the interesting part about him. So the wings always represent the power of intelligence to elevate its thoughts and thus make spiritual progress. And the wings on the feet and at the head of Hermes beautifully typify the divine messenger, or the word, which comes to us with a natural and at the same time a spiritual sense. So this is what Swedenborg has to say about Mercury, or Hermes. There appeared to me a spirit with a little wing at the left side of the head. And it was said that sometimes those so appear who are sent from one to another with letters or messages. Hence it was evidence whence the ancients derived the custom of fixing a wing at the head of Mercury, who was the messenger among their gods. So Mercury is the Roman version of Hermes. At another time, an angel appeared to Swedenborg, as it were, flying from heaven with 2 wings about his feet and with 2 about his temples, carrying in his hands prizes for a company of wise men who had been discussing spiritual subjects. So, in the afterlife, FedEx still exists. All right? You just get wings on your feet instead of a truck. Uncle Rick will be happy about that. The staff, this is supposed to be merely a symbol of peace, but to us, that is us in the new church, this remarkable staff, like the 2 pairs of wings at his feet and his head, represent the word itself, which below, in its literal sense, is sensual, like the serpents, but above, in its internal sense, becomes spiritual by the means of the power of correspondence. And there are 2 serpents entwined in opposite directions, because in the literal sense there is everywhere the duality of good and truth, the gyre or turning of good being from right to left, while that of truth is from left to right. It was by this staff that Hermes led the souls to their final goal, and we may compare it with the staff on which Moses fixed a brazen serpent for the healing of all who looked upon it. The brazen serpent signifies the divine essential of the Lord, which alone exercises circumspection and provides for all, and therefore those who looked at it were saved. The end.
I like this Hermes, god of the travelers, merchants, and thieves.
Yeah.
Is there?
Well, and he's the god of the thieves because he was a thief to begin with. He stole Apollo's oxen, so that's where that comes from. It's not like he's patron saint of thievery, but he did do that, so now he's their guy.
Did they? I just remember that doctors used to have that on their cars. Is that what it was? Did they have that on their cars?
Some medical thing. I don't know about cars, but
no, a doctor, if he was a doctor and had that on his car, so people would say he was a doctor. You know, the Cadmus, I think.
Yeah, what connection does that have to Hermes?
That's strange stuff.
Well, I
Or
think
is that from Moses's?
Yeah, I thought it was more of Moses' thing myself.
Cadmus.
Yeah, we had it here earlier.
The AUS, I think it is.
Where did we have that? No, CAD. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because they say something else there. Where is it? They have another word for it. I thought it was Cadmus. We got another word. Caduceus.
Yeah. I remember. Caduceus. Ancient Greek or Roman herald's wand, typically one with two serpents twined around it, carried by the messenger god Hermes. What does the Caduceus medical symbol mean?
What do you got?
The caduceus is a symbol of Hermes or Mercury in Greek and Roman mythology. Caduceus symbol is identified with thieves, merchants, and messengers, and Mercury is said to be a patron of thieves and outlaws, not a desirable protector of physicians. In other words, that didn't answer the question.
No.
Yeah.
So there you have it. That concludes our 3-week tour of Greek mythology. I certainly think there's room to quibble with some of Oedner's selections on some things, but overall, you go back to the main theme of these classes of seeing evidence of the ancient church in other cultures. And, we started off with, well, Greece is right next to Turkey, where the ancient church was born out of. You think, well, sure, a lot of that knowledge and symbolism would have carried over to the land next door. It's not that hard to imagine that being the case. So, if you were to hold all of this in isolation from the scripture, you go, oh, wow, it's totally different, blah, blah, blah. But when you think of the proximity and just the, how we had that spread of the Indo-European language and how that moved, and, with it, all this symbolism would have gone with it. So it becomes less of a stretch the more I pondered, I guess. And it becomes more like an Egyptian pantheon where you have all these different gods that are personifying different aspects of spiritual reality. And eventually, the stories lost inner meaning and they just became stories. And it seemed like just made up nonsense because they forgot about what this was all really about.
Well, the view of Christianity is only one God. Simple.
It is a simpler system, isn't it?
There's one.
There's one. Yeah. But and even, that's right. It does become a lot more complicated to understand all these different aspects. Just even in Hermes alone, the idea of how God communicates with us, and that's a function of a deity, is just God communicating with us. It adds a lot of complexity to it. So, anyway. Comments, questions, concerns, anything like that? We'll bring Ralph back.
What did you do? Oh,
I just minimized him.
it just minimized it.
Cloak of invisibility.
The cloak of invisibility.
Hey, Lori's being
You're not invisible anymore, Ralph.
So, well, there you have it.
What's next on this?
The next on my list is the Roman myths. But like the idea was to kind of go west. But we only have one more class in November, and then we have Christmas. And I get the sense that people would rather have a Christmas class than a mythology class, which is fine. We certainly spent lots of time on this. So I'll look at see what I can accomplish in a one night thing. Yeah, exactly. So I would think that with Rome we'd have a lot of the same stuff.
There's
But-
a lot of commonality between the Romans and
There is, and that's kind of what might make the Rome thing go quickly, in the sense we could just say, oh, well, this guy's like this guy, and just kind of say it draws out pretty evenly, because all the Greeks gods have a Roman equivalent with Hades is Mercury, and everybody else has an equivalent too. So so we may not spend tons of time on it. I gotta see what else is written and see what's unique about it. But that was next on my list. Any requests for a Christmas class before I start looking around for ideas myself?
I request one.
You request a Christmas
Christmas
class?
class, yes.
Yeah, that's helpful. I was looking through the stuff that we've done over the last few years this week to see. Last week I was looking over what we've done over the last few years.
With a recycle.
So I'll see. So, Ralph, you have any comments, questions on any of this? You're muted, by the way.
Unmute yourself.
Unmute.
There you go. So, what do you got? Anything?
No, nothing. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Good. Well, I'm glad you at least enjoy it.
Yeah.
Any requests for a Christmas class?
No,
You're useless.
I'm useless.
You're useless. That's half the battle, is thinking of what to do for Christmas class.
Oh, okay.
I could probably take a look at what I did years ago, and you guys would all have forgotten it. I could just redo it again.
Yeah, you could do that.
All right.
I've heard it all before.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, I'll switch us off. Good night.
Right.
So as a matter of interest, it looks like the caduceus is a medical symbol. They kind of